Thank you all so much for coming today to this month's training, Dynamic Facilitation. Um, my name is Paula, pronouns are she, hers, and just want to introduce a little bit about what this training is. It's brought to you in partnership with the Massachusetts Public Health Association and through the Community Health Training Institute, funded by the Massachusetts Department of Health. This is a free training that we're really excited for, to provide today, and we hope that you'll leave it with the knowledge to exercise new practices for navigating group facilitation. I just want to, put out a PSA that if you have to leave early, totally fine, but just send me a quick private message and I'll send you the evaluation link so you can fill it out. So with all that said, let's pass it over to our amazing facilitator, Gina San Inocencio, and get started.
Of course, I couldn't find my mute button, right? You queued me up. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Gina San Inocencio. I use the she, her pronouns. I want to welcome you all to this morning's training. I'm very excited to be here today and also still waking up. So if you've got your coffee, your breakfast, whatever you need, feel free to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. I'm really excited to be here today. I do want to take a moment to give my team an opportunity to say hello as well. So I will pass it quickly to Victoria to say hello and introduce herself too.
Hi everyone, I'm Victoria. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the administrative coordinator for CHTI. So feel free to reach out if you're having any tech issues or have any questions or anything. But I'm really excited to be here with y'all today. And I'll pass it over to Allison.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Allison Shifley. I'm an Associate Director at Health Resources in Action and the incoming Director for the Community Health Training Institute. I'll pass it. Am I passing it back to Gina or Paula?
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. I'm ready to jump in. So as I mentioned, I am going to be today's trainer, but I have been with the Community Health Training Institute for the last 8 years or so. So it's wonderful to see some familiar names and faces on the screen. We welcome you here today. We are in the second to last training of the year for us for the Community Health Training Institute. And we have another one, actually an in-person training happening in a couple of weeks on coalition building. So for you local folks that are in Massachusetts, that training will be held in our offices on Boylston Street in Boston. So if you are interested, registration is still open and will remain open. And as always, all of our trainings are absolutely free thanks to the generous funding of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So why are we here today? We're going to talk a little bit about dynamic facilitation, what that is and what that looks like in the work that we do. But before we get into that, why don't we do some housekeeping? So I'm going to ask us to go to our next slide. Y'all know the deal. Zoom is the platform that we're going to be using today. So in order to warm us up and test us out, I would love to hear you all just say a quick hello in the chat box. Drop your name and organization. Let us know who you are and where you're coming from. But we are going to be doing all the things. We're going to be using the chat box for engagement. So I'd love to hear you all comment and question in the chat box. We're going to be doing some breakout rooms where you all will get to talk in small groups as well. As always, we ask if you can share your video to turn on your camera so we can see your faces. That's always really nice. As a facilitator, I appreciate when I can see someone's reactions to the information that I'm sharing, the questions that I'm asking, or the silly things that come up whenever you're facilitating anything. So I love to see that. But I do understand that sometimes it can be really hard for folks to do that. You don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the capacity, you don't want to be seen on camera. So we welcome that as well. We welcome all of it. And we want you to engage with this training. We also want you to unmute yourself if you have a question, a comment, or something that you want to share. And you can find all those buttons along the bottom bar of your screen. As well. So again, I see people saying hello in the chat box. Please continue to do so. And we'll get a chance, like I said, to do some small group work where you can introduce yourselves and do a little bit of networking in those groups as well. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get to some of those conversations as well. So that is the quick Zoom spiel. Does anybody have any questions so far? All right, wonderful. I think we're ready to go on to the next slide. This is just another quick note about using Zoom breakout rooms. This training will be made better the more that you're able to interact and engage with it. So we ask if you can share your camera in your breakout rooms. To do so, unmute yourself and do all the things. So next slide, please. And this is just a quick tip for those of you that do have bandwidth issues. If you are having a hard time managing sharing your screen and also your voice, you can call into Zoom, and you can do that by hitting the little arrow button next to your audio microphone, and you can switch to phone audio, and you can do that by calling the number and entering your PIN. That's another quick tip. All right, and we've made it to our learning objectives. As Paula mentioned, we hope that by the end of today, you're able to identify the basic elements of dynamic facilitation, learn some promising practices for facilitating group meetings across all kinds of platforms, and also to identify some strategies for overcoming difficult facilitation situations. So later on in the agenda, we'll go through some scenarios and also talk about some challenges that come up for you in your work as well. And speaking of the agenda, I think that's the next slide. So, there we go. Right now we're doing our quick welcome, and in a second we're going to give you an opportunity to do some introductions in smaller groups. But what we hope to cover today is really talk about some approaches to facilitation, what makes a good facilitator. We'll talk a little bit about what you need to do, what's your packing list, right? I know that we're in an online training, but there are some things that you're going to need to consider, to ask yourself, to get ready in order to do any type of facilitation for any type of meeting, whether you're in person, online, hybrid situation, all kinds of stuff. And then, as I mentioned, we'll talk about some scenarios and some challenges in facilitation before we close out. We are scheduled to be together till 12 o'clock. So for the next just under 3 hours or so, we're going to be in space together. So what does that mean for us? One of the things that we like to put forward as a best practice is some group agreements. What are ways that we are going to hold the container in this space? And for sake of time, these are some that we're proposing to use for today. And we also welcome if you have any thoughts or ideas for group agreements. And these go by all kinds of things: group agreements, group norms, group rules. For those of you that are working with groups consistently, how many of you, by show of hands or reactions, are doing group agreements in your spaces? I know I do for a lot of the groups that I'm going on, not all of them. Awesome, wonderful. I'm seeing some hands. So here are the ones that we're hoping that we can sort of all agree to today. If you can, leave your camera on. We love to see your faces, as I mentioned earlier today. We ask that you mute yourself if you're not speaking, but also don't be afraid to unmute yourself, because we do want you to speak, which is really what this next one is about. This take space, make space agreement. Taking space is about bringing yourself into this room, making space for your voice, for your questions, for your experiences, adding to this training, and making space for others. I think when you're behind a screen, it can be really easy to just leave that mute button on and sort of take in or not take in what someone is saying. So we are inviting you and asking you to make space for yourself and others during this training. It's going to be better because it's going to be informed by all of the experiences that you all have. You know your group's best, so why don't you bring that experience in this room, ask the questions, do the things, share your own best practices so that we can all learn from one another in this space as well. We ask that you respect yourself and others, and that you take care of yourself. If that means you need to turn off your camera, go grab a cup of water, use the restroom, take a phone call, whatever it is that you need to do, we invite you to do that. We love pet cameos, kid cameos, coworker cameos, wherever you're coming from today, we invite all of it and recognize that's just the part of the way that we work now. So appreciate you all sort of doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. Does anybody have any questions about these group agreements? Does anyone have any additions? Is there something that's not on this list that we need to add? All right. I'll take the silence as it's good to go. Actually, can we go back to the group agreements? Yeah. So can I get either a reaction thumbs up or a physical thumbs ups if we can all agree to these group agreements until at least 12 o'clock, my time?
We also have a confidentiality in the chat.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Allison, for catching that.
Yeah, and I like to
Lori.
change that a little bit to you know, leave the details, the specifics here in our Zoom room, but take those lessons learned, right? Take the themes out.
Yeah, oftentimes we have put that as 4 walls in our group agreements, like what happens within these virtual 4 walls stays in here in terms of the details, but all of the lessons you take with you. Lori, do you want to talk a little bit more about why that came up for you, why you think it's important?
Yes, hi, thank you. Yes, I think it's really important because, you know, when we do facilitation work, you know, we may be speaking about things that are challenging, certain aspects of facilitation that are challenging. And I feel it's important for folks to feel comfortable to know that, you know, it's not going to leave the room.
Absolutely. And I implore you all, if you're working with the same group over and over again, where everyone knows each other and are sharing some of the same stories, or they're working with some of the same people, this is really important, right? To making sure that you're learning from one another and able to take the lessons into your work, but some of that details of those stories can stay within the space that you're working in, the group.
Right.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Thank you both. Yeah, thank you, Lori, excuse me, and thank you, Allison, for recognizing that in the chat box. Awesome. Yep, exactly, Amanda. Take the lessons and leave the story. Love that. Wonderful. Any other thoughts before we give you all an opportunity to connect with one another and say hello? Wonderful. I think we're ready to go on to the next slide. So as Victoria gets the breakout groups ready, I will go over what you're going to be talking about. So you're going to do a quick introduction in your breakout room. You're going to share your name, your pronouns if you wish, your organization, or where you're coming from today. And I'd love you to spend a few minutes to really talk about the last meeting that you attended that you felt was productive. Like a good use of your time, and what made you feel that way. And you're going to be in groups of 3 or 4, I think, depending on what the breakout comes down to when we do the breakouts. But yeah, what was the last meeting you attended that felt productive, like a good use of your time, and why was it that way? Why did it make you feel that way? Any thoughts or questions before we send you off into breakout rooms? Wonderful. And we've added the prompt into the chat box in case you forget what we're asking you to do. All right, Victoria, feel free to send folks off. Here we are. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for having those conversations in breakout rooms. I'd love to hear from folks. What came up in your conversations? What was the last meeting you went to that felt productive, like a good use of your time, and what made it feel that way? Are there any brave volunteers that want to share what came up for you?
Good morning, Gina.
Good morning, Curtis. Go for it.
I have a great story because my organization was so benevolent in sending me to San Diego. We got to go to a Financial Therapy Association symposium, and that meeting was phenomenal because it wasn't just about merely finances. I got to learn from our different upbringings, you know, culturally, and why sometimes we are the way we are, whether we're shy or reserved or what have you, scared to make mistakes, you know, shame being so powerful. So when you can get to a meeting and you really feel like you learned something and it wasn't just droning on, that's phenomenal. So that was it for me.
Yeah, so they gave you an opportunity to sort of investigate what kind of feeds into the way people are feeling and the choices that you make, and connecting it back, probably, I'm assuming, to the sort of financial sort of aspect and why you were there.
You got it. You
Being
were there?
able to, oh, go ahead.
I said, you got it. You were there?
I wish. I went to San Diego. So being able to bring in the whole person, that is really important, right? And to make those connections so it doesn't feel like you're at a lecture or somebody that's just going to talk your ear off for the whole time. Absolutely. What else? What else came up for folks as you were having this conversation?
Good morning. I'm happy to share.
Yeah, go
Um,
for it.
So a clear agenda and then sort of an action plan and maybe working groups when we leave, so we feel like it's productive. We also talked about check-ins, like a check-in question, and then at the end of the meeting, sort of like a reflective question. Receiving meeting minutes is great too afterwards, and just like any agreements that have happened during the meeting, getting something documented so that you can refer back to it and see how, like, the progress that happens.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Colleen, for sharing that. You ticked all the boxes, right? Named all the things that we hope that we can get in all of the meetings. So yeah, being able to have a clear agenda, a check-in question, working groups. So giving you an opportunity not only to check in as a large group, get a sense of what you're going to be doing for the day, but also some opportunity to get in some groups and get actual work done, right? How many times have we been in meetings where it's just like all you do is hear updates? This is what we did, this is what we did, and you're just like, oh, that could have been email. I don't need to be sitting in the room for this. So really kind of thinking through what are the elements that are going to get people to feel engaged, connected, and then what are ways that people can go back, right? Let's say they missed this meeting and they want to learn what was decided or what was worked on. They can go back to those meeting minutes. That can be really important for a consistent group that's meeting over and over again, so they can stay up to date with what's going on as well. Any other thoughts that folks want to share about what makes a meeting feel productive and like a good use of time? Any other elements that came up in your conversation?
Hi, Gina.
Yeah. Hi.
Um,
Go
I
for it.
just
Oh, sorry. I was like, I couldn't see everyone's face. It's Aya. I know her.
Yay, hello. Um, I just wanted to add, like, I really appreciate when meetings are like just as long as they need to be, and like don't try to, like we have an hour slotted, so let's fill the whole hour. No, like if we only have 25 minutes of things to talk about, then let's only be on the call for 25 minutes or whatever it might be. Especially because we talked about like looking at your screen for a long time. So yeah, I really just appreciate when meetings are just as long as they need to be.
Right, not being afraid to end early or close it off. It doesn't mean that like you're not doing what you need to be doing. It just didn't take the entire time that you allotted it for. And I'm never going to be one to complain when a meeting gets out a little bit earlier than expected. I've got some transition time, right? Some time to do what I need to do. I totally appreciate that. Thank you all so much. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next slide. I want you all to keep all of this in mind because we're going to revisit sort of some of these elements in the next couple of slides. But I just want to do a little bit of foundational stuff before we get into some of those sort of elements of good facilitation and good meetings. So what word comes to mind when you think about facilitation? Like if somebody says, oh, we want you to be a good facilitator, we want you to facilitate. What comes to mind for you?
Leader.
Leader, yeah, absolutely. In the chat box, I see active learning. I love that. Organize. Say that again, Susan.
Engagement. Pauline said it too.
Yeah. Engagement. What else?
Be able to navigate conversations and, help sort of push along the agenda as well.
Yeah, able to navigate those conversations, reading the room, being able to make sure that we get to the things that we wanted to get to. All of that is really important. Ooh, Carlos, I love it. You might have seen the next slide. Carlos says in the chat box, you make it easier for the others to share. So why don't we go to the next slide, actually? So facilitate, or to make easy, for those of you that are familiar with Spanish or Latin, fácil means easy, right? So there's the easy button. So really just sort of making whatever it is that's happening a little bit easier. You're facilitating a conversation, you're facilitating a meeting, you're trying to get to that end goal. When I think of facilitation, because I've been doing this for so long, I think of this, right? I'm facilitating a meeting, I'm facilitating a group. It's automatically what comes to mind for me based on my own experience. But to the world at large, it doesn't always mean this, right? You're just facilitating something, you're helping someone get to that end goal. And my facilitation is going to be informed by my experience. I've been at HRA for 8 years, almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years in August. But a lot of my experience, my last 19 years of experience in this space, the facilitation space, has lived in youth work. I'm a lifelong youth worker, and I've done a lot of direct service work, a lot of case management, and it's informed by the communities that I've worked in, lived in, experience. It's also informed about who I am as a person. I'm a mother of 3, and that heavily informs the way that I think about working with people and groups of people. All of that sort of colors who I am as a facilitator. And at the end of the day, really, for me, it's about how do I make this process, this meeting, this group a little bit easier to help get to whatever that end goal is. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Questions so far? Comments? One of my favorite tools as a facilitator is silence. So you'll notice that I'll ask questions or drop comments and then just leave it quiet. And oftentimes, folks will step in, right? Some people are really uncomfortable with silence, and they'll say, "Oh, I don't like awkward silences." So they'll fill the space with their voice, and that's exactly what I want to be happening. As a facilitator in front of the room. A good sign for me is when I see people really engaged in conversation and connecting those points. And it's really easy as a facilitator to make those connections yourself, right? And to just say, this is how this is connected. This is how this is transitioning to this. But it's not about me, right? My job as a facilitator is to make that conversation a little bit easier. And I want to see that come from my participants, either in the room or in the online space as well. Awesome. Beth, can you tell me a little bit, can you unmute yourself, tell me a little bit more about your comments here in the chat box?
Sure. So often when I'm facilitating a meeting and I allow that silence after a question is asked, it lingers for a little bit and then someone always pipes in. But it always seems to be the same 2 people. That pipe in, and then near the end, I mean, they recognize that and they'll say, well, I feel like I'm dominating the conversation. So I think that that's where I sometimes have trouble. Like, how do you, and even saying, how do other people feel? And then you get the silence again. And it's the other person who likes to talk a lot. So I'm trying to figure out. So I do a lot of breakout groups to try and get people to talk with each other. But I was wondering if that was your experience as well.
Yeah, I think it depends on the group itself. And it sounds like you have a pretty good sort of pulse on what happens in your group, depending on what tools that you're using. Silence is a great tool as a facilitator, and we'll talk more about the tools in our toolbox as we're in this space. And yeah, I think what I try to do and what you're naming is like being able to get a sense of who my group is, like the way that they respond to some things. And sometimes silence is a great tool. It's going to get people to be like, all right, I want to fill this space. I want to talk. I want to share. And you don't have to do much. But sometimes you need primers, right? You need a pair question. So somebody feels like they can kind of test out what their opinions are or what they're thinking in a smaller group, like a breakout or in a pair conversation, to then feel primed to talk in this large group. It can be really daunting and nerve-wracking to talk in a large group if you're not used to it, right? And so being able to pull on all those different tools and get your group used to all the different modes to engage and kind of be creative. So if it's not the awkward silence and large group conversation, is it a pair conversation? It is a small group working group conversation? Is it you're asking them to write something down, right, about what they think, and you're collecting feedback that way and not taking it from the whole group and having an out loud conversation, right? It's trying to do all the different modes and see what works best for your group. And I find that in all groups, like all of the things work in different spaces, right? And so like sometimes we're having a really good group conversations, and sometimes no one wants to say anything and they prefer to just write it down right at the end of the meeting to share their thoughts. So we'll talk more about that too. So that'll come up later on in today's agenda too. Thank you so much. Awesome. So why don't we go to the next slide and get in some elements of a good meeting. So you all have already named some of these pieces here. So, right, what I love about looking at this is like across any of these things, whether you're doing meetings online, whether you're doing meetings in person, or whether you're tasked with doing what I find is probably some of the most difficult hybrid meetings when you have people online and in person. That can be really tough. But like good facilitation is good facilitation. So what are some tools and some things we can make sure we are aware of, we can recognize, that are in our back pocket to make sure that we feel like we have productive meetings and groups when we are the ones standing in front of the room doing some facilitation. We want you to make sure that you have a welcoming environment. That first impression is important, right? What are people walking into or coming into when they come to your space? The way that we think about this for the Community Health Training Institute, and as we thought, and probably you saw and heard in today's training, is that we played a little bit of music. Even before you came to this space, you had to register. What are some questions that we asked you in registration to kind of prime you for this training? We played music, we said hello, we gave it a few minutes, right, before we officially kicked it off so that we can leave space for folks that may have joined us a little late. And even if you come at an hour late to these meetings, we're open. We want you to be a part of this. That's part of the reason why we record them as well. So if you missed it or the entire thing or part of it, you can go back and look at our recordings. And if you haven't seen our website, it's hrainstitute.org. And that's where we have a whole library of all of our trainings, all of our online trainings that are recorded. Our in-person trainings are not recorded, unfortunately.
Good to know. I do apologize for being late. Technology literally hates me. But you were trying to the wrong Zoom email. You nailed it.
You're totally fine, Amanda. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it and recognize how hard it can be when you've got so many things going on. I am a mom of 3, and this is graduation week for my middle schooler. So it's been, and like, I was like, I'm so glad tomorrow's Friday because there's always so much going on.
Oh my God, right? And I only have a 2 and a 4-year-old. There's so much. But I don't want to interrupt the meeting. I just wanted to apologize and introduce myself. I'm Amanda. I am an alcoholic and addict in recovery, and I'm a member of Turning Point Recovery Center in Walpole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here. So yeah, all the things in terms of a welcoming environment and making sure that we have or creating spaces that people feel comfortable to share, to say hello, all of those things, you know, are important to making sure that we're creating an environment where folks want to be in. You all mentioned meeting elements, right? We're talking about agendas and agreements and meeting notes, minute notes is what I meant to say. And then what we have here is pluses and deltas, or a way to sort of debrief a conversation, what worked well and what didn't work well. All of those kind of elements are important for it to feel productive. You all named it. Like, we know what's going to happen. We know the work that's going to get done. And then afterward, there's a structure or sort of an avenue to talk about next steps, or to share sort of what we thought about a particular activity. And there's lots of resources out there, and we'll share some of them, but invite you all, if there's anything in particular as we go through some of these elements of a good meeting, if there's a go-to resource that you really enjoy and appreciate, feel free to drop it in the chat box, and then we can make sure that we include it at the end if there's anything that you particularly like that helps aid or support, or any tools that you like for your own facilitation. As well. The next piece on here in terms of elements of a good meeting, our roles are key. And there's a couple roles named here: facilitator, note taker, timekeeper, tech person, chatbot monitor, etc. Now, you don't need all of these things for every single meeting. And it's going to depend on your group or the type of meeting that you're running, but it is important to think about this before your meeting, right? So if we're talking about an online meeting, who is going to be leading, who is going to be supporting. Before we got started with today's meeting, we talked about all of our different roles. Like we knew that I was going to be the trainer and facilitator, so I helped put the agenda and the slides together. And then we were trying to divvy up who's going to share the slides in the space, because as a facilitator or someone that's leading and training in a space, I appreciate not having to share the slides so that I can see all the different elements of my screen. I can look at my facilitator guide, I can look at the video on the screen and see all your faces, and I don't have to worry about making sure that I'm not covering up the slides. So somebody else was able to take on that role, and I really appreciate it. Someone else is also paying attention to any tech issues that we run into with this group, right? And making sure that we're paying attention to the chat box. So, because for those of you that run online meetings, you know, when you're facilitating and trying to gauge the group, it's really hard to pay attention to all the different things, right? If somebody's having a tech issue, a sound issue, if somebody is asking questions in the chat box, it's really easy to miss those things. So having that support is really important as well. Are there any other roles that you all have in your own meetings, whether they be online, in person, or hybrid, that are not named here that you think are important to share?
I can share.
Yeah, go.
In the 84 movement, we have a timekeeper, so someone who lets us know when 5 minutes
Group,
are.
I have facilitated groups inside of alcohol, like and detoxes and stuff. So this is why I'm taking the course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate your thoughts as well. And then Maria, I believe you were sharing too about
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're lagging a little bit, which is might be causing sort of the mix up in terms of the speaking order.
Yeah, no, second, I got.
No worries. So we just wanted to sort of make sure we don't lose what you were just saying, Amanda. The timekeeper, somebody that sort of lets you know when you've got like 5 minutes left to wrap up an activity. And sorry, did I miss anything else that you said, Maria? Wonderful. Thanks so much. Any other sort of thoughts in terms of roles that are key to having in a meeting to support your facilitation? The other pieces that are on this in terms of making sure that you're having a good meeting is some of the stuff that you already mentioned, right? Making decisions, having working groups, having a task that you're able to come together and accomplish during your meeting. And then the other sort of like what I feel like is the other side of that coin is engaging people and building relationships. So yes, it's important to make sure that we're feeling productive and we're getting things done and we're accomplishing all the tasks that are assigned to our group. But part of that is also making sure that folks are feeling a part of the group. They're feeling engaged. They feel like you're building trust within that group so that you can get to the work side of things. And it makes that work, right, easier when you have a group that's really connected, that's really engaged and able to build relationship with one another over time as well.
So I put it in the chat. I don't know if you have someone managing the chat right now, but someone who manages late folks or folks who are doing other things during the training. I know I've facilitated Zoom meetings where folks are doing their laundry and taking care of, just talking to their coworkers. Because maybe there's a supervisor and so they're constantly being interrupted. And so, as a co-facilitator, just being able to check in and say, is there anything we can do to help you focus?
Yeah, being able to pay attention. I remember one of the last times we talked about, or we did one of these trainings, the there was somebody who talked about, oh, it's always good to have somebody paying attention to the vibe of the group, a vibe checker, like somebody paying attention to all the different elements that are happening. If you notice that there's a couple of group members that are in conversation constantly, or like you said, someone that's coming in late that needs to be pulled aside and kind of caught up before they can rejoin the large group, all of those elements are really important. And that's part of the reason why it's helpful to have a co-facilitator as well, right? And making sure that they are also on the same page with you of like what you need to do if someone comes late, and this is what our agenda is, and this is what we have as plan B and C and D if none of the things that we planned work out. And then the last note on this sheet as well is that to remember that everything takes longer when you're online, and especially if you're doing a hybrid meeting, like, because you have to think about all the different instructions that you're giving. Allowing people to come back to this space is really important, because I mean, the reality is when you're doing online meetings, not everyone is going to be fully connected and fully engaged for the entire time that you're sharing the screen, right? Some people are turning their camera off and they're walking away or doing other things or multitasking. That's just the reality of the world that we live in now. So being able to make sure that you've got folks engaged when they need to be engaged and catching people up to speed and before moving on to the next activity, those transition times are important when you're in online spaces and hybrid spaces, because it's just going to take a little bit longer. Whereas if you're in person, you have a capped audience. They are there. You know, they may be on their computer and or phone during your meeting, but they are, you're right there in front of them. And that dynamic is just a little bit different. Any thoughts or questions about any of these pieces? Anything else that folks want to lift up in terms of elements of a good meeting? All right, I think we're ready to go on to the next slide. And this is just sort of similar to what we just talked about. These are sort of approaches to facilitation that are enhanced and sort of, I think, pair well with elements of a good meeting, right? You're thinking about all the different components and things that you're trying to add to your agenda for the day, but it's also sort of really important to think about sort of the big picture. Well, how can I make sure that my agendas that I'm putting together, my activities that I want my group to do, that they are goal oriented, that there's an objective that we have in mind in order to get to, and doing this activity or having this conversation is going to help us get there, right? Or if there's a problem or a challenge or an issue that my group is facing, how are the activities that I'm doing, the conversations that we're having, helping us solve the problem that we need to solve, right? How am I remaining interactive in that space? Sometimes it can be really hard when you're doing online meetings and hybrid meetings to do all of those things. And with anything, you're not going to be able to do all of them all of the time really well, right? So how are we sort of prepping and getting ready for all of these meetings? We talked about facilitation being a space that we're just kind of making some of these easier, but the name of this training is dynamic facilitation. So what the heck does that mean, right? Dynamic facilitation for me is making things easier, and a dynamic facilitator is someone who's prepared, right? Just someone who has, like I said, plan B, C, and D, and paying attention to all the different things that come into play for your specific group, right? So not only the elements of your meeting and the overall approach to your facilitation, but knowing who your group is. And we talked about making a welcoming environment, making sure that we have all the different sort of elements that folks can interact with in a meeting, right? And we're talking about these approaches to facilitation, but that's going to look different depending on the group. And so if you have a consistent group that's meeting over time, you have an opportunity to build relationship and trust, and you can sort of tease some of those pieces out. But if you're constantly meeting with a new group of people, like let's say you work at a drop-in center and you've got a new group of young people that are coming in every single day, that's going to look different. Your approach to some of these pieces are going to look different. And so being able to spend some time really thinking through and preparing your own facilitation, depending on the group that you're going to, is really important, right? And if you have a co-facilitator, having those conversations beforehand, like what's our end goal? How are we making sure that we're getting there? Or what's this problem that we need to solve? And how are our activities or agenda items helping us solve this problem? And how are we switching up our mode so that folks feel engaged and interact, that our elements are interactive as well. So those are some of the pieces that we want you all to think about. And in a second, I have some examples of some clear goals since we're talking about being goal-oriented, but want to leave space if folks have any additional comments or thoughts. All right, so let's move on to the next one. So this is just a quick overview of what we mean when we say goal-oriented and clear goals. So we can go on to the next slide. So we have an example here for you. There are different modes for writing sort of goals or problem statements. And so the first example that you have here, this is our vague example. Can I get a volunteer to read that goal statement out loud?
I can do it.
Go for it, Carnia.
There are different models for writing problem statements, some of which promote better group discussions and tangible solutions.
So you can read the vague one, the first one.
Okay. Vague, how can we engage more community members?
Right, so that's their sort of problem statement. That's what they want to think about in terms of creating clear goals, right? So how can we engage more community members? So we've labeled that sort of as like a vague ask, right? How can we engage more community members? But we think that that statement can be sort of focused in on a little bit better, right? So can I have a different volunteer read the next version of that statement?
I'll read it.
Go for it.
Better. How can we increase attendance in coalition meetings?
Yeah. How many times have we had these conversations, right? If you're working with a coalition or a community group, how can we increase attendance, right? How can we get more people to come to these meetings? So the first sort of statement was, how can we engage more community members? Like, that's good. It's not a bad goal statement, but like, let's think about what it is that we're really trying to accomplish. How can we increase attendance at coalition meetings, right? Get more seats, more people in our space, right? And then there's a best option here at the bottom. Can somebody else read that one for me?
Best. How can we increase attendance in coalition meetings that's reflective of our community by the next fiscal year?
Right. So this is really going to get at in this sort of examples, what is going to get to that goal, right? Like that sort of honed in focus, like if our goal is increasing attendance in meetings, specifically by people that are reflective of our community within the next fiscal year, they're honing in on who it is that they're trying to engage, how they're trying to engage them, and when they want to engage them by. So it's good to have goals, but also really be clear and specific about what they are and when you're trying to accomplish them. I'm sure you are familiar with SMART goals. It sort of gets at the same thing, right? Trying to be specific, measurable, attainable, and then all the other letters and whatever they mean. It's a similar idea and concept, right? So I think these are sort of just a primer, the foundation to really thinking about, okay, if I want to be a good facilitator and I want to have productive meetings and I really want to sort of be dynamic and engaging, what are some of the things that I need to consider as a facilitator? What are ways that I can prepare myself, my team, my co-facilitator to make sure that we're paying attention to all the different elements that go into facilitation and that we feel prepared, right, in order to do so. So I want to hear, in a second, I want to hear from you all who you are as a facilitator. Have you taken a moment to think about what your personality is when you're in front of a room or in front of the screen? And what does that look like? So on the next slide, we have sort of a fun way of thinking about how we do that. So I'm going to go to the next slide, please. So these are just some really fun examples of how we think about how you can think about who you are as a facilitator. This is like you pick your profile, right? What is your presence? What is your style? And then pick an animal that represents you as a facilitator. So when I look at this, I think of my presence as both calm and maybe fun. You all can let me know if I'm fun or not, but but I try to bring calming energy when I can, because I tend to be, when I'm not a facilitator, I tend to be sort of a quieter audience member. So I hope and pray that some of my calmness and funness comes through in my facilitation. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge fan of using silence as a tool and really giving space for my group to engage and participate. So I tend to be the silence dweller, right, in my facilitation. And then in terms of my animal, I like to think of myself as a chipmunk because I'm short and little and I like food. I'm a Taurus. So we want to give you all a few minutes to think about your own facilitator profile. So we want you to think about, what is your presence? What is your style? And feel free to fill in the blank, right? There are multiple options here, and pick your animal. And I would love to hear from some folks. So we'll give you some time. We'll play a little music for you all to reflect on your own facilitation style. And this is just self-reflection. We'll give you about 5 minutes or so. I'm going to say it again for the recording, but we are about to give you an opportunity to share who you are as a facilitator and share your profile. So is there a volunteer that would like to share with the large group what you came up with?
Hello, I guess I can share a little bit.
Perfect, go for it.
The presence is calm. My style is questioner, and I would say owl. Always watchful, always paying attention, always aware.
I love that. Is there a go-to question that you have when you're working with a group that you like to ask?
Well, depending on the nature of the conversation, I always usually like to ask, do you really believe that? Because sometimes people would like make comments or say things, and maybe they just heard it and it sounds nice, or maybe it sounds good in practice, that in theory, but when you ask them if they really believe that, if there's something that they're really willing to stand behind, like if somebody pulled up receipts, 5 years from now, they're like, do you really stand by what you're saying? And that usually gets them a bit more thoughtful about some of the things that they're sharing or claiming or saying that are truths in these conversations.
I love that, and being able to sort of just investigate, right? Giving them time to really reflect on what it is that they're saying. And what I hear from that is really thinking about sort of the impact that might have on the group or the conversation, and giving folks time to kind of sit in what it is that they're sharing. Thank you, Carlos. Others, what's your facilitator profile? What came up for you as you were thinking about who you are and your own facilitation?
I can share.
Go for it.
So, I mean, in doing this reflection, I was thinking that it really depends on the audience for me. I think like if it's a youth training, then I'm a little bit extra and like more energetic than usual. I would say I'm pretty energetic overall just as a person. So that probably comes out in even boring meetings. But yeah, with youth, I think I put on like a hat of just being a little bit more fun. With adults, I would say, like, as far as the animal that represents me as a facilitator, I was thinking goldfish, because goldfish have like a 2-second memory. And every time, because I've been working on this project for a long time, and so every time I present, I want it to feel like the first time. And like, it's not like I'm bored talking about it, because I'm really not. So I think that even with adults, I try to act excited about the content that I'm giving. So those are what came up for me.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Carly. I love that. And I love being able to think about who the audience is and do you show up differently based on who it is that you're facilitating for. For me, it's always like, what time of day am I facilitating and how is that going to impact? I don't know if you've been able to tell, but I am not a morning person. And so 9 a.m., 9:30 meetings and facilitation is rough sometimes. So I've got my coffee. This may or may not be my second cup of the day, which I don't usually do, but listen, 9 a.m. is rough. And I am much more energetic in the afternoon. So when I'm having afternoon trainings, those tend to get a little bit more personality. And also sort of making sure that I'm managing who I am as a facilitator based on how I'm facilitating. So online versus in person are two different Ginas, right? I try as much as I can, although sometimes it doesn't always come across, but when you're facilitating online, because you are just a box on a screen, turning myself up just a little bit more so that I can draw people in, engage them in as much of whatever is going on as I can, right? Making people laugh and really drawing on the comments that they're sharing and making connections for folks so they feel included, creating space as much as I can so that I get people to really interact, because it's hard to be in front of a screen and get people to engage with you. And sometimes you have those groups that really don't want to engage at all, particularly online. So you gotta get creative. You gotta put yourself out there a little bit more. And then you better believe it, as soon as 12 o'clock hits and we are done, I'm gonna decompress, turn my brain off for just a little bit, so that I can recover, because it drains a lot of your battery, or at least for me it does. As someone who tends to be an introvert, it drains a lot of my social battery to do facilitation. So I need some recovery time at the end. Is there anyone else that wants to share their profile or what you reflected on as you thought about your own style as a facilitator?
I can share.
Go for it.
So my presence is calm. My style, I think, would be somewhere between questioner and maybe like silence dweller. Because I also think that the silence is a, very useful tool. And as far as an animal is concerned, I came up with a koala because I tend to be like, I connect on an emotional level with people. So like I read the room a lot. I see a lot of like the body language and the sort of like, which is harder to do obviously on Zoom sometimes, but and so I don't know, koalas are kind of calm and cuddly, so
I love that.
But also not to be messed with.
Also not to be messed with. All right, Dora, we will not.
Just kidding.
But yeah, being able to read the room, and I love that you mentioned sort of how hard that can be depending on where you are, right? It's a little bit harder to do that online versus in person, but paying attention and having some time to really think about your group is really important. And I encourage you all to think about doing not this particular activity, but just having the conversation with your co-facilitators if you have one, right? Somebody else that you're facilitating with, really thinking beforehand, before a meeting or before your group, how are you showing up, right? How are you approaching your facilitation, what that's going to look like, and what might be helpful to have from your co-facilitator? What do you want them to bring to the table, depending on the activities that you're doing, what you might expect some of the group dynamics to be on that particular day? Having those conversations, being prepared, is going to make your own facilitation that much more dynamic, because you're doing that constantly, right? Reading the room, paying attention, using your tools, and thinking through all the different elements of your meeting as well. So thank you all for doing that. We're going to talk through a little bit of some tools in these next few slides, and some of this might be, actually, before we do that, I already got my agenda all mixed up. We are actually going to do a quick brainstorm as a large group, and then we're going to talk through some tools. So we can go to the next slide. Actually, the one right after that. So we are going to do a large group brainstorm, I believe, or are we doing a small group? Let me just look at my agenda. Yes, we are going to do a large group brainstorm about what makes a good facilitator. So I would love to hear from folks so that we can add it to the slide. What do you think makes a good facilitator? We talked about what makes a good meeting, right? All the different elements of a good meeting and some approaches to facilitation, right? We're goal-oriented, we're interactive, we're problem solving. But now that we've done some reflection of who we are and the elements that we bring to our own facilitation, what do we look for in a good facilitator? What makes a good facilitator? And I'll give you a hint, some of this stuff you've already named for yourselves. Lori mentioned assertiveness, comfort with conflict. I love that. Someone who's engaging, who has positive energy. What else? What else comes to mind? Someone who's holding space. Someone who makes silence their friend and not their enemy. I love it. I love that you all are embracing the awkward silences. Awesome. And we're trying to keep up with the notes in the slide. Someone who is culturally aware. Someone who uses people as resources. Questioning, someone who's questioning and helps the group get to the root. Someone who's asking reflective questions. Topic focused, can both be silly and serious. Someone who can manage conflict in a healthy way. Trust and believes experience in the room. These are awesome. Any other thoughts about what makes a good facilitator? On Zoom, good lighting. No, that's not English, Gina. Good lighting, looking into the camera to engage people more. Someone you can connect with, someone who stays on topic and allows for deviation that loop back to the topic. So being able to close that circle for folks if you do get kind of off course. Someone who leans in their strengths and knows their leans in their strengths and know there's areas for growth. All right, there we go. It's getting tongue-tied there. Someone who manages time effectively, recognizes culture and equity dynamics, and someone who's respectful. Yeah, I love that. So lots of comments here from folks. Thank you so much. I think Victoria is trying to keep up. We're literally off the slide at this point with all these different thoughts and ideas in terms of what makes a good facilitator. But I echo a lot of what you all said, and I believe and know just based on what you all have shared so far that a lot of you hold all of these already, right? And it's really just making sure that we're paying attention to who our group is and how we're responding to things that come up, right? So being aware of the presence that you have in the room and also who your group is so that you can respond accordingly, right? And so part of what we're hoping that you can do here today is take some of the tools, tips, and tricks that we're going to posit and also share your own. So if there's some go-to activities or elements or things that you have that you find work really well with your group, please share it with us as well. So we're going to go on and go through some of these slides. So thank you so much, Victoria, for taking those notes. We are going to send, I know we sent the slides before the training, but we're also going to send them after, and we're going to send the ones that have been filled in based on the comments and thoughts that you all have shared in this group as well. So we're going to go to the next slide. Wonderful. So in-person, online, and hybrid facilitation, what is the difference? So I said this a little bit earlier. Today's good facilitation is good facilitation, but there are some things that we need to consider as we think about the different modes in which we're facilitating, right? If we're in person, it's going to look a little bit different than if we're not, right? So what you find here sort of in our in-person column is some things to consider in terms of location, right? Location matters. So where is it that you're hosting your meetings? Is it someplace that's accessible to your group of folks that makes sense? Is it something that a place that you've been to before? Have you seen it? Do you know what it looks like? Do you know what the setup is? Do they have tech? All those things. Location matters, and there's lots of questions and considerations that you need to make when you're having in-person meetings. In-person meetings, in terms of your visuals, right? Your visuals are going to be different than if you're not having an in-person meeting, right? Are you doing slides? Are you doing flip chart? Are you handing out pieces of paper that folks need to be writing on? Like, what is your physical packing list that you need to be packing for your in-person trainings? And then the last sort of comment on here is really thinking about, are you able to move? Like, if your meeting is in the same place at the same time all the time, is there space for you to move it up a little bit? What does that look like for you? And will that help you sort of get to more people in your group or make it more accessible for other folks as well? So those are some quick in-person considerations. Online considerations are some of the things that we've already shared. Things take more time online, right? We need to ground people in your online platform, make sure that everybody knows what it is that we're using, right? If we're on Zoom, or if you're on Teams, or if you're on another different Google Meet, I think it's called, I don't remember. We use mostly Zoom, but making sure that you yourself feel comfortable and grounded in your platform, and that your group feels that way as well. And then use all the tools in terms of online, all the things that you have available to you in terms of engaging your audience, breakout rooms, chat box, unmuting, polls, surveys, all the things, making sure that you're using as much as you can that's appropriate for your group to engage them as much as possible. So those are some online considerations. And then the third one on here is hybrid. And this one for me is always the toughest, right? Because you have both, basically. You have to balance both. Not only people that are in person, but also folks that are online as well. So that you need, oftentimes, it's a best practice when you're doing hybrid meetings that you have a facilitator online and you have a facilitator in person, so that you have somebody that's able to focus on the audience that's both in the room and that's online. You're going to need more prep time just because you want to be really aware of all the different activities that you're doing and making sure that you have both ways of engaging the audience that's in the room and the audience that's online. And you need really, really good tech in order to make hybrid meetings successful. You need really good audio. People need to be able to see and hear one another and engage in a way that makes them feel included, right? And not just like, I don't know how many of you are doing hybrid meetings, but there are some really good ones that I've gone to, and there are some where there's like 3 people on a screen, and we've completely forgot about them. Or the people in the room have completely forgot about them because they're off in a laptop somewhere living in the ether. So there's a lot of preparation, I think, that goes into hybrid meetings that we need to be paying attention to. And it just requires more time and more people power as well. And then there's some stuff for all 3. Body language, you all have already talked about that. The tech, the setup, the visuals are key. And then again, all the different elements of engagement and how we're trying to engage our audience. So would love to hear from you all. Are you doing mostly in person? Are you doing online? Are you doing hybrid? What are the types of meetings that you're doing, and what's coming up for you? I hear from Kirsten in the chat, our org does a lot of hybrid meetings. We have an OWL, and that helps a lot. For those of you that are not familiar, OWL is a technology that you can use in a room that does pretty good video and audio quality. I think I was working with High Square Task Force in Jamaica Plain here in Boston, and they had an OWL in the room, and it picked up all the sound, and I think the camera moves, right? Like whoever's talking, it kind of moves to that person, and then you can see. So if you have the budget for that type of technology, that's really helpful as well. Other thoughts, folks saying they do online and in-person meetings. At my center, we do a lot of in-person. I do mostly online or in-person. Hybrid is tough for all involved. Absolutely. Any other thoughts about some of these considerations here, or questions, or things to add in terms of best practices? I think Carly mentioned this in the brainstorm that we did earlier in terms of a good facilitator. She mentioned if you're an online facilitator, making sure that you have good video quality, that your face and your voice can be seen and heard quickly. You all are actually experiencing a different setup from me. I used to have my computer on the other side of this room and it was facing my door. Which was really interesting and not very smart of me because my kids always came in this room. And so they would open the door and I would usually have, I would blur my background because I don't know how you all feel, but I always feel like I'm in my bedroom. Like that's where my office is. And so I often feel sort of weird of just like, if people see my bed, I don't know. It's just a thing that I have. But anyways, it used to be, my computer used to be on the other side and people used to see my door. So when you have a blurred background, all you would see is just like the blurry figure of my 19-year-old son in the background. You're like, what is happening back there? There is a presence behind you. So I made the decision to move it so that it was facing something that wouldn't feel, I wouldn't look as weird on screen. And then I also made the decision, even though I sort of felt weird about, oh, if people see my bed, is that going to be weird? No, but a lot of people have their home offices in all different rooms in their houses, and whatever works for me is okay, as long as it's not distracting. And I get good lighting, I'm good. So that's the decision I made for myself there. As well. So yeah, so those are certainly things to be paying attention to for your own sort of online facilitation. And I also recommend any of the virtual backgrounds and uploading your own. For a long time, I had this fake office that I would use whenever my room was messy and I didn't want to clean it. Any other thoughts that folks want to share in relation to any and all of this? All right, so we are going to, hold on, let me go back to, there we go. I was like, I forgot. We're going to go through some of those tools and then we're going to take a quick break. So the other sort of pieces and tools that we want to share, if we go on to the next slide, are this idea of content versus process, right? The content is the what, so all the things that we talked about in terms of elements of a good meeting. So what are the tasks that we want to accomplish? What are the subjects that we need to discuss? Are there any problems that we need to solve or decisions that need to be made? What do those agenda items look like? And what are our goals or objectives that we want to accomplish? So all of that is the what of your meeting or the content of your meeting. And then the process, which is on the other side, is the how. How are we going to have this discussion? How are we hoping to get this problem solved? And what's the method of which we're going to make decisions, right? And that can look different depending on your group dynamics, all the tools being used, the rules or norms that you have set for your group. So if we go to the next slide, this talks a little bit more about processing tools. Right? So we have used a couple of these already today, right? We did some brainstorming. That's a processing tool. If we want to get as much and many ideas out there, we want our group to really think through and be creative around something. Brainstorming. We're brainstorming, we're putting ideas out there, and then we're having a conversation. That's a process tool that's going to help us get to our goal, right? Some other pieces on here you've named as well: small group work or pair work or individual work can serve different goals, right? If you want folks to really sort of do a working group because you have 3 different topics that you want folks to go on, small group work might be the best option to do that. Or as I think I mentioned earlier when Beth was sharing, like, you know, there's not a lot of people that are talking. Sometimes a really good primer to a large group conversation is having a very small pair group conversation. So you're sharing your ideas with one person, talking it out a little bit more before you then share with a larger group. So you've heard what it sounds like out loud, and you're like, okay, I feel comfortable sharing it with the large group because my pair group conversation went really well. Or maybe I left my pair conversation with some more questions, so I want to bring it to the larger group to share as well. And then individual work, again, is another piece. So we did a little bit of individual work when I asked you all to reflect on your facilitator profiles. Another way that can look like, you can do journaling in your group. You can have folks fill out a questionnaire. You can have folks do surveys. All of that can look like individual work. And then the last couple that are on here are straw polling, sort of voting, kind of getting a sense of where your group is at. Zoom has a lot of poll options as well. So if you have not used the poll options through Zoom, I encourage you to play around with it. There's lots of ways to engage and get a pulse check on your group through different polls. And then visioning is the last one on here that I think I haven't talked about. But for me, when I think of visioning, I think, you know, oftentimes we do like guided visualization. So ask folks to kind of close their eyes and kind of vision. If we say that our goal is to engage the community more, what does that look like? Who comes up for you, right? And we do some sort of visioning in that way. There are a lot of youth organizations that I've worked with that have done vision boards. So like, what's my goal for myself in 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, and then you do vision boards, and that's another way of doing visioning. But these are just process tools that you can use in order to sort of accomplish some of the content of your meeting, whatever that may be. Any thoughts or questions about any of this? All right, I'll let you all ruminate on that. The next slide, we don't really need to go over. We've talked a lot about this, but I'll put it up for you all to see. We can go on to the next slide. We talked about questions. We talked about silence, right? Those being sort of really good tools for you all to use. And it sounds like you're using them already. And then we just reviewed all the process tools. What are ways that we can get to the content of our meeting? What's the process that we're using in order to do that? The last piece that I want for you all to think about and consider is something that came up in the chat box a little bit earlier. If we go to the next slide. What's the role of the facilitator? So somebody mentioned in the chat box, and forgive me, I don't remember who it was because the comments were flying through as we were going through the brainstorm of what makes a good facilitator, is how the power of the facilitator, right? Like how that person, sort of, you're in front of the room, you hold some power in that space. And so how does that impact, how does that land and how does that impact your group, right? Like, what is it that your role is as a facilitator? So if we go on to the next slide, these are some things that I want you to think about, right? Like, our role as a facilitator. Are you an impartial facilitator? Are you there to facilitate a conversation and you don't have a stake in the game, right? That decision is not one that you need to make. You're just helping the group kind of get to their end goal, to make a decision, to get a task done, right? You don't have a stake in the game. I often have that role in a lot of the different groups. We're coming in to help support them through a strategic planning process, but I don't have necessarily a stake in the game. I'm just supporting them to kind of get through their end goal, right? Versus an invested facilitator, right? If you are a facilitator or a lead in a coalition, right? That's a very different role that you're holding, right? If you are working in the community that you're living in, that's also a very different role. You're invested, you care about the decisions that are going to be made or the work that's being done in your community, and that's going to impact how you facilitate and engage with your group. So these are things that are really important to clarify and to know ahead of time. Right? Who am I in this space? How does that impact the way that I engage with my group, right? And then the other pieces that I think are important that have an impact on both content and process is thinking about intentional observers. For me, when I think about an intentional observer is particularly when you have like a funder in the room, like somebody that's not necessarily contributing, but is just there to kind of see how it's going, right? And the dynamic that that brings to your group, right? Somebody that's observing, paying attention to. We were just doing a couple trainings for Boston After School and Beyond in that network. And they have observers that come in and they score the way that they're engaging with their young people. And then that score then informs what trainings that they need to bring to the network. So when you have an observer, when you have somebody that's coming in, that's not only kind of just watching the group, but actually scoring on the way that you're doing things, that's going to have a really different impact on the way that you facilitate, right? Depending on what's going on or what the observer is there for. And then also sort of interrogating this idea of an expert trainer when it comes to content. Like, how do you think about expertise, right? And I think this also came up in the comments earlier, really thinking about what experience you deem as expert and what does that mean? Like, am I an expert facilitator? That's not what I would call myself. That's what some people might call. So like really navigating and investigating what does that mean and what I'm bringing to the table. So not necessarily have a lot of answers here, but a lot of questions that you need to consider as a facilitator in terms of your own role and how that impacts the group that you're engaging with. I would love to hear from someone sort of what their role is in their group and how do they think that kind of impacts. Like, are you an impartial facilitator? Are you an invested facilitator? Are you a part of the group that you're facilitating? Or are you sort of just there to help them kind of get to their end goal? I'm also not opposed to calling on people. I haven't had to do that yet, but I will if I need to.
I think it depends on obviously the meeting and the groups. So for me, my current role as a director of community life, of course, I am an invested facilitator. And you know, there's a goal and a share vision and the collective actually movement that we want to sort of get to, and everyone has the responsibility and you know, in this movement. So for me, yeah, I will say in my current role, I'm invested.
And are there spaces where you feel like your opinion or when you share your thoughts has a different impact because of the type of because you're invested in the outcome?
Absolutely. And it's very sort of intentional, because I think that sometimes organizations, you know, have a great mission, right, on their website, and great goals and values. But the reality is that, you know, sometimes our actions and the way we work with one another is not really aligned with that. And so I tend to really stick to what we are saying, what we say we are, right? And so I have to sort of, I feel like I'm invested in that, just reminding people who we say we are as an organization, what do we stand for, and our values. And I think that I'm having to repeat that over and over again, different spaces, because there's always that gap, right? And that's always very hard to navigate. And bringing people back, okay, this is who we are. Maybe in your personal life, you do that, but as an organization, this is what we're standing for.
And it's really helpful. Thank you for naming that, Suzette. And I think it's really helpful when you're able to go back to some of those goals and values and agreements as a group, especially when you feel like there's sort of a bump in the road or your group is not exactly on the same page. Like, we all had a say in these goals, right? We all had a say in these agreements. So let's kind of go back and revisit what we came up with together as a group to help inform how we move forward, right? That as an invested facilitator, I think is a really good tool to help get your group back and to be paying attention to how much weight your own voice and opinion has on a group that you're invested in, right? That you have a stake in the game, your organization is funding it, you're helping, maybe you are a decision maker. That's going to land differently, right? Your thoughts, your feelings are going to land differently than if you weren't, right? And so how do you navigate that as a group? And what are ways that you can make sure that you're sharing some of that power with your group, that they feel just as invested because they have a say in those goals, right? In those agreements, in the decisions that are coming down the pipeline for your group as well. Any other thoughts about this piece or any of the tools?
Hi, I'm Amanda. I work with people who cause harm, and they are almost always mandated to take our program. So I think, like, looking at these 4 squares, I think our clients would say that I would say I was an invested facilitator, but I think our clients would more view us as like the expert trainer teacher. But we're trying to foster an environment where we want them to want to grow and be invested in themselves in making those changes, and trying not to have this so much of a power differential over them. So it's a really like multifaceted like dynamic. So I'm like looking and I'm like, we do like all 4 of these things, but it's really hard to create a space where people are open. So I'm like listening to all this saying, how do we do all these things? So thank you. But I think I hopefully fall into the invested facilitator and not the expert, because after 10 years, I'm definitely not an expert. And I'm definitely not an expert in other people's lives. But I think that's where I would fall. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amanda. I think you bring up a really great point. Sometimes it can be really hard, and in spaces where folks are mandated to be in your space, the tool or the conversation that I find that's really helpful in those spaces. I worked in a youth program in Lowell where we had an after school program, but the nature of the program was that it was mandated. It was mandatory for all kids to be involved in after school if we had engaged in with their family in other different ways. Folks that were involved in the DCF system. So they had to come to our after school program, and being really transparent about that fact, right, was really helpful, sort of a really good starting point to working and engaging and building trust with those young people. Just being really clear, like we recognize that you don't have a choice to be here. So there are going to be some days where you don't want to be here, but you have to be, right? And so like, that's not something that we're able to change. But here are some things that we are able to change, or here are some things where we are able to create, build in your input. So how do we create space where you can have ownership over these other things, because we don't have an opportunity to change the fact that you're mandated to be here. And so creating space in that way, and that allowed a little bit of room to navigate some of those really difficult conversations, because it is really hard, especially in those instances.
Gina?
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit on, would you mind speaking a little bit on where it says bringing on equity lens, how that relates to the techniques?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when we think about our facilitation, the way that we think about sort of bringing an equity lens is really considering all these different things. Like, what are ways that we're paying attention to who our group is and how we show up as a facilitator. So if I were doing this training with a co-facilitator, I'm doing this by myself. And in fact, this is where this slide came from, is I was doing this type of training with somebody else, one of our directors. We pay attention to who the training pairs are. So the facilitator that I was doing this particular training with, was a white woman, and I identify as a Latina. And so we pay attention to who our facilitators are and the experience that they bring, and paying attention to the power dynamic that plays within a space. I happen to be a solo facilitator today, so that is not a consideration that we had to make. But I think the pieces about power and who we are and how that shows up in our facilitation, really, as we think about what that looks like for our group, it's just an important thing to consider and to question in any group that we're walking into as well.
Thank you.
Awesome, of course. Thanks for your question. All right. So we are going to head into break, and then when we come back, we're going to dive into some practice. We're going to do some scenarios and hopefully get you all an opportunity to test out some of these tools and to talk through them a little bit more after our break. So we are going to do a 10-minute break. So currently here on the East Coast, it is 10:41 a.m. So we will come back in 10 minutes, and we're going to put up a timer on the screen. So feel free to take a break, walk away, turn off your camera, do what you need to do, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you so much for not recording those stretches as we did our little stretch break. But we are going to review just a couple things before we get into some practice with some of the tools. But by show of hands or reactions, how many of you have a physical kind of packing list for when you're doing in-person meetings? Like, make sure bring flip chart paper, markers, and notebooks, pens, things. Okay. All right. How many of you have a packing list or a list of things that you need to do and get done for when you're doing online trainings? Maybe less hands this time, I feel like. And do those lists, particularly the online and or for those of you doing hybrid, do those lists live somewhere outside of your head? Like, if you left your role today, could somebody pick up where you left off and know what to do if they were hosting an online meeting for your group? For CHTI, for the Community Health Training Institute, I've been here for the last 8 years, although the project itself has been in existence for just over 10 years. We have a very particular way that we do all of our meetings. So all of our in-person meetings has a very specific packing list of things that we need to bring, because we usually provide breakfast for our in-person meetings. If that is enticing to anyone, we're having one in a couple weeks. So that means we have to buy the breakfast and bring all the food items along with all the things that we're going to need for the training: markers, flip chart, paper, pens, fidget toys for people to play with while they're sitting in the room with us. So all of that is a very particular, it's a well-oiled machine. So we just know this is where the packing list lives. Whoever's packing for the training, making sure that they grab all the things, right? And for our online trainings, they look a little bit different now post-COVID than they did pre-COVID. But we had it down to a science. So if we were doing an online training, we would meet in the office together and we would have a diagram of who would sit where. So if you were running the slides, you would sit in a particular seat. If you were the trainer and we needed your audio to be the best, you would sit in a particular seat. And then somebody else would do the recording and somebody would do the introduction, welcome. So there are very particular tasks and roles for the way that we do online meetings. Things have shifted a little bit since COVID, and everything sort of lives on Zoom. So we're not as prescriptive because we try to be a little bit flexible because some of these trainings look a little bit different. But as much as we can, we try to do all of that prep ahead of time, talking about our roles, who's bringing what, who's doing what. And so this is just sort of a reminder of what your packing list can be, and what are some of the things that you need to be paying attention to as you prepare for your meeting. So do we know how many people are attending? Have you done registration? For CHGI, because all of our trainings are free and open to the public, it's always sort of like a guessing game of how many people are going to actually show up to the training. We had I think up to 50 registrants. There are not 50 people in this room. And so it's always sort of a guessing game, sort of science to figure out, okay, how many people, if we have 50 registrants, we can probably count on about 20 to 25 people in the room on the day of. And that's for online meetings. For in-person meetings, it's even less because it's so hard to get people in the room. You have to have a really compelling topic or reason to get people in the space because folks are so used to doing stuff online now. So how are you preparing? What do you know about your audience, and how can you make sure you have enough people that are coming to your meeting, right? Just because 50 people register doesn't mean 50 people are going to show up on the day of. Unless you really know your group and you're like, yes, they're very clear about coming. So I know that all the people that are registered are going to be there, unless they have extenuating circumstances. But only you would know that about your group, right? So paying attention to that. And then the other sort of considerations on here, do we need ASL, language translation, closed captioning? Are there other sort of pieces that we need to be prepping ahead of time so that we are making sure that everyone feels included and is able to engage with our content and the activities that we're doing? You may have noticed that we sent out a preparation email prior to this training. We sent out a PDF of the slides. We sent out instructions about logging on, and we sent out contact information. If you had any questions or issues, you can contact us prior to the meeting. We also keep, for these trainings, we also keep our registration open till the last possible minute. So you could have signed up, you know, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago when we sent it out in a newsletter, or you could have signed up this morning. And so as a facilitator, these are things that I have to consider as I'm prepping. Like, we put together a registration report of all the people that had registered, I think up until 2 days ago, right, Victoria? And then that was about 50 people. So I got a sense of who was coming, or who was registered, excuse me, what organizations they worked at and what they were hoping to get out of the training. But in the back of my mind, I knew this doesn't have to be everyone. Someone could have signed up this morning and I know nothing about who they are and where they're coming from or what they're hoping to get out of this meeting. So I'm balancing all of those pieces as I think about how I'm facilitating and how I respond to the folks that actually came here in the room. Doing a run through, right, with your co-facilitator. Is there any practice that needs to happen beforehand? Both online and in person is really important to know what to expect and to have those conversations. That takes intentional time, right? Unless you have a really good relationship with your co-facilitator and you've been facilitating with them for a really long time, you're going to need to prep, right? You're going to need to practice and do all the things. I practice a lot on my own. What am I going to say? Am I taking down notes? I don't want to feel like I'm reading through scripts, but I want to make sure I'm hitting all my talking points. And that's also part of my prep too. And we've talked about this today too. What's your plan B and C, right? If something doesn't happen the way that you expected to, if tech becomes an issue and your sound goes out or your screen goes out or the slides are not working, right? Like, what are your plans B and C? And then again, if you're providing food, crafts, or hands-on things for in-person meetings, and if you're having a hybrid meeting, what does that engagement look like? What are those considerations look like for your online participants? How are they feeling included and engaged in those pieces as well? What are your goals? And what does that look like for folks that are engaging with all the different pieces in your meetings as well? So this is just a quick sort of, and this is not an exhaustive list. I'm sure there are 20 other things that you can think of that could be added to this list as well, but just some initial ideas of a packing list or things that need to be included. Is there anything glaring that's missing from this list that you all think is important to name as you're preparing for your meetings? You're welcome to add them to the chat box as well. If there's anything here that's missing that you think is important to add. But we can go to the next slide. One of the other process tools that I wanted to name here is the POP model, because we talked about content being the what and the process being the how. The POP model is a great way to sort of set up your agenda, or it is for me. It's a model that I really enjoy doing, and it's just really easy. One, it's easy to remember, POP. And POP stands for purpose, outcomes, and process. So purpose being the goals. What are the goals of the purpose of my meeting? What are we hoping to accomplish? And the outcomes, like what do we want to get out of this meeting? And then the process being sort of how we're going to do that. I want to give you a quick example of what that looks like so we can go through the next slide. So as I mentioned, I was part of supporting the High Square Task Force in their strategic planning process, and we would have 2-hour working group meetings, and we did a POP for every one of those meetings. And this is just an example of one that we did as we were in the thick of doing their strategic plan, right? So the purpose of the meeting was we were working on their core values and goals. So the purpose was to continue that work, right, on refining and finalizing their values and goals. That was the purpose of the meeting. And then what were the outcomes? What were the outputs that we were hoping to accomplish at the end of the meetings? We wanted to have the values at a solid draft because we had been reworking and working them. And then we wanted to have the goals, which were slightly further along in the process. We wanted to have them almost finalized. And then we wanted to make sure we had our next steps in place so people kind of knew where we were in that process. And then the way that we were going to get all of that done is the agenda, right? What's the process? And so you'll see here, we did some connecting in the beginning, we did some value work, we did some goal work. And then what we put on the agenda is if we have time, right? If we get through all the things that we were trying to accomplish at the end of this meeting, there's some more work to be done. So if time, we can work on strategies, and then we wrap up at the end to make sure everybody knows what next step. So this is what a POP is, and that's what it looks like, right? You're just declaring what your purpose is, what you hope to have your outcomes be by the end of the meeting, and the process being your agenda. Like, how are we going to do the things? And POP is one tool to do it. I'm sure you all have a bunch of others, but this is just one that I tend to go back to whenever I'm putting together an agenda for a group. So just wanted to share with you all that. Has anybody used POP before as a tool? No, awesome. Oh, Julia, yes, Hernia, thank you. Julia, that is a great question. Can you share process for timing? That is one of for me as a facilitator, I often have a hard time timing out my agendas because I always think that things are going to take longer than they actually do. I build in a lot of time, and then sometimes the conversation goes like that, and I'm like, shoot, now I've got 20 minutes that I need to fill and figure out something to do. So it's like an art and a science. I don't have a perfect formula, but I would love to open up to the other facilitators in this room. Like, how do you handle timing for some of the pieces that you're doing with your groups? Like, what's your secret formula to your timing? Not so secret if you share it with us, but I won't tell.
Sometimes it's just your best guess. You know, sometimes it's just your best guess, you know, from experience, who's in the room, how much time you want to give. I mean, I have been in small groups that were 5 minutes, you know, and we're given this task to do. And, you know, 2 out of 3 people got to share. The third one, there was no time for. Other times you get 20 minutes in a group to answer similar questions, and you get to know the people. So again, you know, it's what are the priorities of the meeting? If the priority of the meeting is not relationship building, then your small groups typically are going to be shorter, and so you time it differently.
Yep.
Again, it's experience and your best guess.
Yeah, there's no sort of like secret formula that's going to help you figure it out, and it's going to depend. You know, one group can be really good one day and your timing is on, and then that same group the next day can be completely different. So it just depends on the moment. I tend to, particularly with new groups, I tend to build more time in the beginning of my agendas, giving space and time for people to connect with one another, introduce themselves, Because I know if I spend a good chunk of time really sort of helping build a little bit of community and giving folks an opportunity to talk to one another and priming them, the rest of my agenda is going to be better because they would have, you know, brought their voice into the room or shared their thoughts with another person. So that primes them to do a little bit more sharing and more engagement later on in my agenda. So I tend to build, like for this meeting, I built 30 minutes for an intro and introduction that included our question in our breakout room and also our agreements, my own introduction, the introduction of my team. So I tend to build more time at the top. But if we were a group that met consistently and we all knew each other, I wouldn't put as much time, especially if we had a lot of things that we were hoping to accomplish. So yeah. Great thoughts. Thank you. And then, yeah, experience working with the same group in the chat box. It's not easy to figure out. No, it's good to err on the side of too much time. Then you can end early if you end early, which was something that was mentioned right at the beginning of the meeting. Absolutely. And then just the last key takeaway for this piece, we can go to the next slide as we're sort of getting into the practice of facilitation. The key takeaway is that a dynamic facilitator is a prepared facilitator. We talked about having time to prep with your co-facilitator as well, kind of thinking through all the different considerations, planning out your agenda, knowing your group, right? If it is a consistent group and paying attention to the group dynamics and how that might play into all the activities and things that you have planned. Having backup plans if things don't work out. So have a backup plan for your backup plan. And then at the end of the day, which comes with a lot of time and experience, is really like if it all goes to shit, being okay with that things happen and they're out of your control and doing your best to kind of manage those expectations. Yeah. Any other sort of thoughts or lingering comments before we get into some practice? All right, so I'm going to prime you. We're going to do some larger groups this time. We're going to break it up into some scenarios. So we can go to our next slide. Yay, scenarios. Okay, next slide. So we're going to do 3 different scenarios. And I'm going to read them out loud. Scenario 1 is a hybrid meeting. A virtual participant cannot hear what is being said in the room. How do you manage this in the moment? What can you do to make sure that this person stays engaged? Imagine what the facilitator might do or say. And so as much as you can, I'm calling these scenarios and not role plays because I don't want to scare anybody away. But if you want to act it out, practice what that might sound like as a facilitator. What would I say if somebody's really just not engaged and having a hard time hearing? And it says here, the virtual participant should kick this off by role playing the problem, right? How would you respond in that situation? And somebody can, as a facilitator, respond to that person. So that's scenario 1. So this large group here, we're going to break you up into smaller groups. Scenario 2 is an in-person scenario. So a participant keeps talking over everyone and is the first one to speak every time you ask for input from the group. How do you handle this? What can you say or do to make sure everyone is feeling included? And we want you to role play that in your group as well. And then the last scenario here is for an online meeting. The virtual co-facilitator loses internet and they can't rejoin for the next 15 minutes. You haven't prepped for their part of the agenda they're going to lead, and they can't join for the next 15 minutes. So how do you handle this? What are you going to do? You've got 15 minutes until this next facilitator comes back and they're up on the agenda. What are you going to do? So those are the 3 different scenarios. We've also added them into the chat box. So when you go into your breakout rooms, you can look at the different scenarios to make sure you understand. So we're going to split you up into 3 groups. Group 1 is going to do scenario 1. Group 2 is going to do scenario 2. Group 3 is going to do scenario 3. Any questions about this? This is just a quick primer. What comes to mind? How would you handle the situation? And what might you say as a say or do as a facilitator? Any questions? All right, Victoria, feel free to send them off. We will see you back here in about 10 minutes. Welcome back, friends. Welcome back. Thank you so much for chatting in your small groups about our 3 scenarios here. I know that was not nearly enough time probably to have those conversations, but really this is just a primer. I want to get a sense of how you would respond to some of these situations as a facilitator. What are some things that came up for you? And or what are some tools that might come in handy if you were to experience these things in your own meetings? So our hybrid meeting scenario, what came up in your conversation? How might you respond to running into those tech issues? Anybody from group 1 want to share?
We discussed the importance of actually planning a meeting. So when you plan, you could actually send the presentation ahead of time. So that happens, at least the person can still follow and have the presentation. Also closed captioning as well, recording the meeting. So that person, maybe if they're having technical difficulties, they still get the recording of the meeting. Maybe they could watch it later on. And relying on our tech savvy folks, and for them to sort of support that person, but at the same time not distracting us from the larger group. So I think that some of the things that we highlighted for our first group.
Awesome.
Anything else that I forgot?
Anyone else from group 1 want to share or add?
I think that we all agreed that this was the hardest scenario and that we don't, I don't know. I hate hybrid because it's just so difficult. And then I'm always like, oh my God, I'm forgetting about the people, like, so, but yeah, heavy tech support on the hybrid model is a good thing.
Absolutely. And it is a best practice for hybrid meetings to have a facilitator both in the room and online, because it is a lot for one person to manage and also be able to facilitate whatever agenda that you have planned for your group, to be able to navigate all those things. So those roles, somebody that's really good and able to support tech, somebody that's keeping track of time, somebody that's paying attention to everybody that's online and making sure that they have access to all the things, and then someone that's doing it in person and doing the same thing as well. So all of that is really important, and preparation is key. The more prepared you are, the better you're going to be at your facilitation, because you've got all the things in your back pocket that you can lean into and pull from when those challenges do come up. Absolutely. So thank you both for sharing. How about group 2? Anyone from group 2 want to share? And now I have to relook at the scenarios to remind myself. In person, someone that keeps talking over everyone else. That's what that scenario was. So what came up for you in group 2? What came up in your conversation? How would you respond?
I'll talk.
Go for it.
So let me get my notes here. So we talked about trying to find the best place to infiltrate yourself, into what they're saying, because sometimes they're not even taking a breath, and trying to do it without interrupting or feeling rude. And I think sometimes, though, we talked to one of the things that was discussed is that it's okay to have it feel a little uncomfortable or like you're interrupting, because it's like, oh, geez, it helps people understand, okay, maybe I'm talking too much, but doing it very respectfully. So usually saying something like, hey, could you pause for a moment? I have a question about that, or let me clarify that point. And then going to the group and bringing them into the fold and saying, does anybody else feel that way? Has anybody else had that experience? Or what do you think about that point? Just kind of, and even validating what that person is saying. Because I think that's kind of what we all want, right? We want to be validated for our opinions and how we're feeling. So just taking it and, you know, maybe interrupting and having a little bit of discomfort, but saying, you know, that's a really great point. And wow, thank you for sharing, because that must have been really hard to share. How to, and then bringing it to the rest of the group. Let me see. And then also maybe using language before you give us, you know, more information. Let's hear from others and hear any advice they might have for you regarding this, or what their experience might be like, because it kind of catches them to think, oh yeah, like let's hear what other people think. So, you know, I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I know I have a really hard time with it. But I think if, you know, I think everybody knows when they're going on a little bit.
Yeah, and I love that language that you name, like validating, like, and thanking them, like, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Those are really important. And then sort of doing the pivot. All right, let's open it up to others. Would love to hear what they have to share, or if they have a different experience. One of my favorite things to do for an in-person meeting to help mitigate some of those challenges with some people that are sort of taking up all the airtime is just to be very clear about the structure. We're going to have a speaking order. So if you have something to say, just raise your hand. All right, I'm going to have you, you, and you. And then you go through the order. And then if somebody butts in, be like, oh, hold on one second. I have these two people ahead of you, and then I'll come to you. And that way you're able to sort of manage. And then being able to recognize, especially if you're a part of the group, right? You're an invested facilitator, you're a part of the coalition, recognizing yourself in the speaking order. You also don't get to butt in every single time, right? So you put yourself on that speaking order, so you're sharing that airtime with your group as well. So that's a tool that I often turn to, particularly in in-person meetings, because you can physically like say you and this and John is, and then sometimes that can be a little bit harder online. But you can still do it online. You can name it in the chat box. You can say it out loud if you know people's names and you are familiar with the group. But yeah, and as an in-person tool, that's often my go-to. I totally get it. And then I think somebody mentioned this earlier too, going back, it maybe not in the moment when somebody's speaking over people, but if you see it as a consistent issue, going back to your group norms or your group agreements. Like, we want to make sure that we're making space for lots of different voices. What does that look like for us? Or maybe as a facilitator, you're changing the mode, the process of which you're gathering feedback. So it's not just large group discussions, you're getting input from people in other ways that sort of helps deter from somebody continuously taking over that conversation. So I love that. Thank you, Beth. All right, and then our last group, you're on an online meeting and your co-facilitator loses internet and they were just going to lead the activity and you have no idea what the activity is. What are you going to do? How would you respond to that scenario? What came up for you all in that group? Group 3. And as a reminder, group 3 was Curtis, Ed, Finn, Jacqueline, Julia, Maria, Rachel, Regine, and Sarah Evan. Anyone else? Anyone in that group?
Gina? Hey, Gina.
Yes, go for it.
What I've had happen before, and it wasn't a facilitator's role, but it was like a coworker that was going to speak on something, and tech was just not being a great friend that day. So I just called them and let it speak, on speaker so people could still hear. So I could envision something like that where I back them up with the slides since we've already gone over it. And now you're just using the speakerphone aspect. I've seen some people talk about FaceTime as well. And of course, if it's Zoom, maybe a call-in number. But yes, hasn't happened in the facilitation role, thankfully, but I've had to do it in other permutations.
Yeah, being able to call someone. And when we mentioned in the beginning, you can switch your audio to phone audio. So if you already know that you're having tech issues or that your Wi-Fi is kind of spotty, you can get ahead of it, right? And say, I'm going to join for video on my laptop, but I'm going to actually call in because I have better cell service than I have Wi-Fi. So that could help sort of get ahead of an issue like that. Other thoughts about what you might do in the moment if that happens?
We talked about kind of similar to the scenario 1 about having a tech person designated to kind of help the other facilitator or figure out what's going on with the other facilitator while the main facility or while the person has not fallen off and is facilitating kind of continues. And that I said, because I've seen people, it's understandable that you have a moment. It's okay to give people a 2-minute break while you kind of collect yourself and troubleshoot. But also if, you kind of have to figure out how you can pivot. Can you skip that portion in hopes that the person will come back on? Or do you take on their component? Have you planned in advance so that there's some sort of guide that you can follow? So it's really about being flexible and really just trying to not bog down the session with your, anxiety or frustrations about the situation, and kind of just keep it moving as much as possible. I don't know if there's other people from the group that remembered more than we did.
That's absolutely it. I think really just giving yourself grace. Like, we're all human. These things happen. We understand that like tech issues are going to happen, and being able to allow yourself and just be like, hey, y'all, we're having some technical difficulties. We're going to take a quick 5 as we figure this out and navigate it, and giving yourself time to be like, all right, this is happening. What am I going to do? Now that we've run into this issue. And that's why that preparation is so important, so that if you run into those issues, you have a backup plan, right? You're going to call the person and that's going to help. Or maybe they can't connect at all, so you're able to do the other activity and then go back. Or maybe you have to adjourn the meeting altogether. You can't do it without this facilitator, and then we're going to regroup and figure out what we're going to do instead, right? So all of those things, it's going to depend on your group. It's going to depend on your agenda and what you've got going on. But being able to think on your feet, part of the way that you get better at that is to think, right, and prep ahead of time. And then some of it is experience. The more experience that you build and gather as a facilitator, the better you're going to get at like thinking on your feet around different alternatives. And if you have a co-facilitator, really talking with them about what some of those plans look like, right? And then talking with them about your role, your presence as a facilitator, what you believe your strengths are, what you're hoping that they bring to the table, and what that looks like with the group that you're facilitating with. So all of those conversations are really important and are part of that prep piece. Any other thoughts or additions that folks want to add about any of these scenarios?
I was just gonna say for scenario 3, obviously you can be upfront and say like, oh, the person that just dropped off, that was the facilitator who's gonna do the work. Give us a second or something. But if you have a facilitator guide, nobody knows that person was the person who was doing this next section. Nobody in the meeting needs to necessarily know that like this is not how this was planned to go. And if you can, at least fake your way through it, you don't have to do it as well as the person who dropped off. Like if you can, it's my first time doing this section, but I'm not going to tell everybody that, because that's just going to put everybody in a mindset of like, oh, this is not going well. This is not how it's supposed to be. If you just do it, then people might be like, oh, this was exactly what it was supposed to be, and it was great. So
I love that. Thank you so much, Ed. Fake it till you make it, right? If you've prepped and you've got a facilitator guide. So for us, that means that you have the activity, the instructions, and the talking points, right? If you have the main pieces, pick it up and give it a try. And then again, give yourself grace. It doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect every single time. And even if the original facilitator that was going to do it doesn't mean that they're going to do it perfectly either. We're all just sort of figuring this out and doing our best. So that's why prep is key. So if you've got all of that stuff prepared, then you could potentially pick it up and keep the agenda moving without anyone being the wiser, right? And being able to do that. And oftentimes, when I am facilitating with a co-facilitator, when I'm doing it online, we have a separate like either text chat or Teams chat, so that we're constantly sort of reevaluating. Oh, this activity is going really well. Let's give it a little bit more time, or we can skip the next one. We've had this conversation, so that on the back end, we're having those conversations. That looks differently in person. Sometimes it's putting your people in groups, right? Oh, at your table, have this conversation while you check in with your co-facilitator in person, right? And having that conversation. And online, it just looks a little bit different. Wonderful. Thank you for naming that. All right, so this next piece is really thinking through, these scenarios were really sort of just a primer to get you thinking about how you might respond to some issues that might come up. And this next piece is to get a little bit more specific around what comes up for you in your facilitation. What are some challenges that you face? And some of you have shared some of them, but we've created a Google slide deck that have these general themes: tech and logistics, relationship building, engagement, problem solving / adapting, and a fifth category of just other for anything that doesn't fall in those general themes. And so in a second, we're going to give you opportunities to click on the Google slide. So that link is in the chat box. So let's make sure you can access that. And on your own, you should be able to edit, go in, and just add any challenges that come up in your facilitation around these different themes. So if you run into tech issues because you use Teams all the time and you have a hard time navigating that, adding that to that brainstorm. So really, we're just kind of brainstorming together on these Google Slides, just not out loud. And we're going to give you a few minutes to do that. And then after we've brainstormed some of the challenges, we're going to talk about what are some practices or some strategies that we might think to address these specific challenges that come up for us. But this is the first part, and then we'll move into the next part of the activity. So we're going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes to do this brainstorm and add any challenges that come up for you. So if you are having trouble accessing those Google Slides, please let us know, and we can add your thoughts to the slides if you don't have access to them. All right, welcome back, folks. Thank you so much for having those conversations. And for the sake of the recording, you all not only brainstormed a list of challenges based on these 5 different themes, but you also in small groups talked about some strategies that you might use to address those challenges. And for the sake of time, I made the executive decision to leave you in your small groups as long as possible so that you can talk through some of those solutions, because we're not going to do a large group share back. But what we are going to do is that now that you all have sort of wrapped up your thoughts, we are not only going to continue to share the PowerPoint slides, we're also going to share the Google slides so you can go back and review some of the ideas that you all generated together. There are also some tips and tricks on our PowerPoint slides that we won't have an opportunity to go over, but you're welcome to go back kind of in your own time to review, a lot of which we've already talked about today. But that is the nature of these meetings. Again, timing is always for me a struggle in terms of facilitation because it's either always too much or too little time. But just wanted to call out some of the things that I noticed as you all were in your breakout rooms. Some of the things that I love and came to the surface for me, this on facilitation strategies on tech and logistics. Somebody said, print your facilitator guide on brightly colored paper for in-person trainings. How many times have I taken my guide and put it down and walked away and was like, where did it go? What am I supposed to be doing next? I love that. So thank you so much for adding that tip. Looking through some of the relationship building pieces, I love this idea of being strategic about where people might sit in an in-person scenario. And if you're noticing clusters or cliques of people are always sitting together, play an icebreaker that's going to get people to move around the room. And then you have a whole different configuration of where people are sitting. And then you can start your activity or discussion. So I love those ideas as well. And then lots of really great ideas under the engagement slide as well. A lot of people, what I noticed are comments around like, what are games or different icebreakers that we can play? And one, there's I'm trying to remember. I'll make sure that we include it in the resources, but there's the community toolbox online that has a list of really cool things that you can do with your coalitions around engagement. And there's a book, a blue book called Moving Beyond Icebreakers that has it's like a 300-page book, and it has a whole host of not only sort of icebreakers and games and activities that you can play, But there's like talking points, like you can do this in a group that doesn't have a lot of trust built, or that is a trusted group, do this activity. So that's another resource for you all. And we'll make sure that we include it in all of our materials before we send it out. But just want to thank you all for spending the last 3 hours of your time with us. A quick reminder, we have an in-person meeting happening, an in-person training happening in a couple of weeks, with what you see on your screen. And I also want to, before you head out, ask you to please fill out our feedback form. We will share not only the link for the feedback form, but also this lovely QR code. All of your input and feedback is taken into consideration and helps inform our future trainings. But I want to thank you all so much for your input, your time, and your thoughts. It is that time. You're welcome to sign off and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you so, so much. Please fill out the feedback form. Don't forget.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great training.